This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me now, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo, and the Shadow Employment Minister, Brendan O'Connor. Gentlemen, I want to show you a bit of the reaction internationally, certainly in Russia, to the Prime Minister's comments about shirt-fronting Vladimir Putin. This is from the Kremlin, the pro-Kremlin paper associated with the Russian Communist Party, Pravda. I'll just read a little bit of it to you. I would advise Russia's President Vladimir Putin to wash his hands carefully and sterilise them after shaking the paw offered to him by Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott at the forthcoming G20 in Brisbane. It's not about Ebola, it's about the disease called insolence and Australia's colonial chip on its shoulder. There was that story. It's also grabbed the attention of the Global Times in China and even the Wall Street Journal covering the tough language from the Prime Minister yesterday. Steve Ciobo, what do you make of it?
Well, look, Kieran, we don't apologise for the fact that Australia, of course, lost many Australian residents and citizens in the downing of the Malaysian aircraft. The fact is that it was downed by Russian-backed rebels. The fact is that we expect that Russia should comply and cooperate fully with an independent investigation into what took place there. So, frankly, I think that the Australian people would expect nothing less than a Prime Minister who's willing to stand for what's right, who's willing to make it clear that we expect full cooperation from Russia in relation to the investigation of that flight. Now, we're not saying that Vladimir Putin took the decision to down that aircraft. What we are saying is that we expect Russia to fully comply with that independent investigation at the absolute minimum to demonstrate some goodwill, frankly, not only to Australia but to all of those nations that lost innocent civilians on that flight.
Brendan O'Connor, your thoughts on the comments from the Prime Minister and the reaction to it?
Well, if it helps the Russians see sense in providing information to establish the truth as to what happened to MH17, then that's all good and well. There's no doubt that there is enormous disquiet in the country about the visit that's likely to happen at the G20 by Mr. Putin, and I think it's therefore quite understandable that when we're still yet to identify all of the bodies that have been recovered, and we're thinking about their friends and families, that we really say to the Russian president he has an obligation to be forthcoming in relation to details that he knows about that awful tragedy.
So support for the Prime Minister and his stance there, that language used.
Well, I'm not sure. He's from Sydney. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he knows what shirt front means. He's from Sydney, but he's trying to be strident and forthright, and I think certainly the Australian people are very upset about the lack of cooperation that seems to be happening between Australia and Russia. I mean, you've had the Dutch authorities go back to the site only today to retrieve further information with a hope to identifying all of the bodies recovered. It is a terrible tragedy for those directly affected, families and friends, and we've got every right to be angry about the lack of regard and response by Russia in relation to this incident. As Steve said, this is something that has happened as a result of Russian-backed rebels using weaponry that could only have been provided, it would appear, by Russia.
Indeed. Well, let's move on. I want to talk about this pay offer to the Defence Force. They're clearly not happy about it. Thousands have responded to the Defence Welfare Association, some 8,000 making complaints, Steve Ciobo.
Well, look, Kieran, the fact is that I'd make 2 points in relation to this ADF pay claim. The first is this, is that we're not going to be lectured by the Australian Labor Party in relation to this issue. The Australian Labor Party presided over the biggest deterioration of Defence Force spending in Australia since the Second World War. They ripped some $25 billion out of defence spending, and what's more, they also attempted to reduce recreational leave for single ADF personnel overseas without any compensating pay increase. So that's the first point I'd make. The second point in relation to the claim is that, unfortunately, Kieran, we we exist in a situation now where Australia is borrowing $1 billion a month just to pay the interest on the debt that Labor left behind. We are providing a pay increase for all defence personnel, at least that's in terms of what's being proposed. The actual decision will be made by the Independent Remuneration Tribunal. It's not a government decision, it's an independent decision. So we've put forward some offsets in terms of productivity gains that we'd like to see as well. But importantly, there is a pay increase on the table for all defence personnel because frankly, we regard their work and them exceptionally highly. They are incredible Australians, and so we want to recognise that.
I know the opposition leader has written to the Prime Minister requesting a greater pay increase, Brendan O'Connor, but even the Chief of the Defence Force, Mark Binskin, said that this was the best that he could do in the current climate.
Well, the Defence Force Chief is in a very difficult position. The fact is the last agreement that were providing wage increases for ADF personnel was 3% per year. The offer on the table that's been referred to is in fact a pay cut in real terms. 1.5% will not meet the inflation rate, so it's a pay cut. And add to that the removal of recreational leave. We think it's unreasonable. We understand that there are fiscal pressures, but to cut ADF personnel wages in real terms is not acceptable. There's no point turning up to farewell the troops and tell them, by the way, we're going to cut your wages. That's what's happening here, and the Prime Minister needs to reconsider the position, intervene and ensure that there's a decent wage offer to our men and women who defend this country and serve us so well.
Steve Ciobo, your response to that, and in the context of a newly begun military operation in the Middle East?
Well, again, 2 points. The first is that we're not in any way decreasing the allowances that are paid for those personnel that are serving overseas. All of those remain in place. There's no reduction there. The second point, Kieran, is really this. Frankly, I think a lot of people are a little tired of the Australian Labor Party's approach. Labor has this view that, oh look, there never needs to be any belt tightening, there never needs to be any. Well, I'm going to, Brendan, and the way I'm going to do it is to say and to call upon your party for once and your leader, Bill Shorten, for once, to stop the grandstanding and to actually have a little bit of actual responsibility about your nation and your job as an opposition, because the fact is that Labor is big on rhetoric, big on talk, but 2 key points. One, when you're in government, you slash spending. When you're in government, you slash spending by 25%. And 2, you're now demanding that there's extra pay, you're demanding all this extra pay, and your opposition stands in contrast and stands in opposition to us actually making additional budget savings, which could pay for the very increase that you're talking about.
I can understand why you don't want to address the question, Steve, because it's
I'm addressing the question, Brendan. I'm addressing the question by saying, why don't you as an opposition shape up, frankly, and why don't you actually put forward some savings so that we can actually pay for exactly what you're talking about? Because the fact is, until you as an opposition make a reasonable and responsible decision, we cannot provide additional pay increases.
Of men and women who defend this nation.
Okay. Well, look, we're almost out of time. I do want to ask you both, Steve Ciobo, the Prime Minister's comments on the coal industry generated a fair bit of reaction yesterday. Was there anything more than we should read into this than the fact that the PM was opening a terminal which is going to employ 500 people on an ongoing basis?
Well, look, the simple fact is, Kieran, that this is a new project that created some 2,000 construction jobs while it was underway, some additional 500 jobs as part of its ongoing process. The simple fact is that energy is going to be a key export for Australia going forward. It has traditionally been, it will continue to be, and the Prime Minister made the very valid and sound point that coal will be part of Australia and the world's future because...
Okay. But is it embracing fossil fuels as other parts of the world aren't, moving away from this, basically, that we're going in the opposite direction?
We're not going in the opposite direction, Kieran. There's still a hell of a lot of work that's happening around renewables. There's still a lot of investment that's taking place in renewables. What we're simply trying to do is to level the playing field and say, look, when it comes to fossil fuels like coal, they've been around for a long time. They will continue to be around for a long time because they provide cheap energy for literally billions of people around the world that are energy poor, and this is one of the most effective ways to do it.
Brendan O'Connor, just 30 seconds
Yeah.
left. Isn't that the
Sure,
reality that coal will provide the base load for decades to come?
Of course, it's got a future, but we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We should be investing in renewables. Of course, we support the coal industry. We need energy security to ensure that we have baseload power, but we do need to see better from the government in terms of investing in renewables and provide some certainty for those who invest in new technology to provide alternatives to fossil fuels as well.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Brendan O'Connor, Steve Ciobo, thanks for that this morning. A quick break, back in just a moment.